Presented from the Aishin Broadcast Studio at Babcock's Media.
Welcome to the AutoSuccess Executive Spotlight. I'm your host, Brian Ankney. Today our guest is Will McGinnis from FullThrottle.ai. Welcome, Will.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you coming in today.
Yeah.
So let's talk about CDPs. And I know Full Throttle, you guys have been called a CDP, but you're not. They're kind of the buzz right now. Talk to me a little bit about CDPs.
It's definitely a very broad term, but also buzz is probably the right word for it. CDPs are the end game, right? They are what dealers want to be able to combine all their data together, and that's a really hard task to do. When you think about DMSs, when you think about CRMs, when you think about all of the different manners in which dealers collect data, then to pull all that out and try and combine it and clean it and hydrate it to do something with it, that is a almost insurmountable task. And so the way that I think about CDPs and our part in it is more being a CDP bridge. And there's a lot of CDP bridges out there. And what I mean by that is what Full Throttle does is we help identify traffic and build audiences and help inform those CDPs as dealers go down that path of creating that CDP and trying to step into the future with data.
Gotcha. Let's talk about that a little bit more. So when you say bridge, and you're collecting this, you're helping to bridge that data. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, help me understand that a little better.
Yeah. So our function, Full Throttle's function, is to identify traffic that comes to a website and build audiences. And there's a few other vendors out there that do similar things. But our function is to build a true first-party audience, and to one of our capabilities is to bridge that data to a CDP partner that a dealer or dealer group may be using. And where we've seen success there is to help just increase that data set that the dealer's trying to build. Ultimately, with CDPs, the outcomes that dealers and dealer groups are trying to achieve there is you have so much, it's so rich. This DMS data is so rich. CRM data is so rich, but it's also messy. You get out of it what you put into it, and we all know salespeople don't always put all the right information into a CRM when they're conducting just prospecting or trying to breathe life into cold deals or dead deals. Same goes with the DMS. Like, if they don't ever come back and buy another car from this dealership, how clean is that data? And so that ultimately is what CDPs, what the goal of building a CDP is to clean and hydrate that data. And where our place in that is to bring fresh, new first-party audience data into that fold.
Gotcha.
It's one of the pieces.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I imagine a CRM is a great example of a lot of kind of crazy data, because you've got so many different ways that data come into a CRM.
Yeah.
And also salespeople, which are notorious for not always putting all of it in. I mean, You can't blame them. I mean, if you got two customers in front of you on a Saturday or it's busy, I mean, you're not always going to put it in, or you write it down and then you get another customer. I mean, so yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you're taking all this data from all these places, you're combining it, cleaning it, and when you said hydrate it, explain that to me a little bit more.
I mean, similar to cleaning, right? Cleaning. So I don't want to try and be a professional, like a specialist here in the the confines of a CDP, but one of the things that really helps, that word hydrate, what I mean by that is to dedupe data, clean it, append data. In a lot of instances, somebody may have sold a car to you 10 years ago. You no longer have that car, and you moved or you changed your phone number. So your data in that dealer's database is no longer actually valid, but they don't know that at this point in time. And so oftentimes what they try to do is hydrate that data that's one of the goals of building out a CDP.
Yeah, it's funny. I got a birthday card this year from a dealership that I bought a car from, and I've moved 4 times to different states since I bought that car, and I actually sold that car back to that dealership before I moved.
Yeah.
But they sent me a birthday card, and I live 8 hours away now. But I got a birthday card this year for a car I bought in like 2010 or 12. I was like, wow. That's very, very nice. It's very nice they sent me a birthday card, but I'm not a prospect.
Yeah. And the fact that they got your address is, a testament to hydrating some data.
Yeah. They definitely had the right address.
Yeah.
So let's shift gears. Okay. This is a tricky question. I got a hard one for you. Attribution. Attribution is a very difficult thing to achieve, and the landscape's always changing. Where are we getting leads? How are we marketing to our customers? How are dealers adapting, to all the different things they have going on right now as far as attribution goes, and trying to figure out where their business is coming from?
Yeah, another broad topic, Brian. I think, historically, the easiest way to attribute leads and deals is to, you remember the days where they had the little sheet at the desk at the towers, like, where did you hear about us? And Google, Cars.com, AutoTrader, etc. And, that was one of the ways to try and attribute that deal, right? And so a single click, now that fast forward to everything being digital, we can see there's a footprint of how this lead came to us. That's typically a last touch attribution is how it would be defined. Like, this click on this site led to this transaction. But what we have found and how we measure and how we see data coming in is that journey is not linear, and that journey is vast, and it's oftentimes it's very multifaceted, utilizing different resources. Most people are that window. I heard recently, actually at NADA, that window of transaction has shrunk to like a very small window from lead to sale. But the research phase has actually grown exponentially. And we see that data kind of stretching months, right? Sometimes 6 months, sometimes longer, before they actually even submit their information. And so future state and attribution, it's really more about measuring your total ad spend and the outcome of all your sales, and measuring that against your entire marketing mix. So you can ensure that you're not necessarily dismissing one of your vendor partners that may not have contributed to that click from how you see it, but was part of their journey. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I guess, for instance, if somebody was maybe they're looking at a 4Runner and a Passport, and they're going to spend 6 months looking at 4Runners and Passports, and maybe they see your site, maybe something brings them to your site, but that's not what led to the sale. So 6 months later, they click on an ad, and they end up at your site, and even though that ad is what brought them on the day they bought the car, it's all the other things that even made them interested in seeing that ad. Is that right?
Yeah. That could easily be a version. I was with a client actually just last week, and we were looking at their data, and one of the things that we can see, and I don't mean to talk too much about our product, but one of the things that we can see is that journey, right? We see that journey of that transacted household. And the funny thing was that they started their journey in the service lane. Right? So their first click into the website was schedule service. And then a month later, they're on used Nissan Pathfinders. And then 2 weeks later, schedule service again. So clearly there's like just inherent read of the journey of this particular customer is service related in some capacity. Maybe they're sitting on a bigger RO and now they're just curious and then used cars, new cars. They ultimately, ended up on a brand new Pathfinder 3 months later. So that journey started for them in that regard, but they came back multiple times, and that driver was service. In another instance I saw with a Toyota store, it was a radically different journey, and it was over the span of like 8 months, and they were on used cars over and over and over again. and they transacted on a 2025 Sequoia. So like there are different variations of how that journey comes to be, but ultimately, like in every single instance, pay-per-click, email, Facebook community, cars.com, AutoTrader, like these customers are doing their due diligence and their research, and they are, hemming and hawing, as I like to call it. And all the meanwhile, you can't really tell how that journey is going to end. And if you're just measuring that last click to a Facebook ad as the measurement of success, you miss that entire journey.
The journey may never start.
Yeah.
I mean, they never make it to the opportunity to click if you don't engage early, right?
Right, and stay in front of them.
Well, you mentioned a couple different customer journeys there. Like, what does a typical customer journey look like?
I mean, there's so much data out there, and we see so many different journeys. I think it's really hard to define that, to be honest. I think, what I do see is two things. One, it's a lot longer than you think it is. And oftentimes with our dealer clients and agency clients alike that have dealers as customers, over and over again, I see that buying journey for 20 to 30% of their transactions month after month is well over 45 days. Like there's a lot of journeys that, there's a lot of people that are, 15, 20, 30, 40%, like varies depending on market, but they're going to transact in that first 20 days, right? Like they're in the market, they came to be in the market. But there's a significant portion of a lot of dealer transactions that actually started well before. And I see that being about 20% over 45 days.
I guess that makes sense. You're always going to have the people that buy a car because, like you mentioned, all of a sudden I got a $5,000 repair. Maybe I'll just trade it in.
Yeah.
Or my car's dead, or my kid just turned 16, or whatever it is. I'm moving and I don't need two cars anymore, or whatever it is. You're going to have the people that have those life events. But then there's this other group of people that maybe I'll get a car next year. Maybe I'll look around a little bit. I imagine there's probably more of that person. We just didn't know before because we didn't have the data, right?
The one really great thing that I see over and over again is that understanding that your marketing mix and measuring every single piece of your marketing mix. So whether it is listings, whether it is pay-per-click, Facebook, all of it combined, and looking at that journey as a totality, looking at all of your transactions month after month to understand I spent $100,000 this month on marketing in total, and I got X number of sales and X number, and whatever amount of gross that I pulled in there at that point, and then doing your deep dive into every single transaction and what was the actual cost of each of those transactions in totality, and then kind of backing in and adding in and layering in the typical metrics that you would utilize, just straight up attribution, last click attribution, how many leads did I get from, vendor X, vendor Y, et cetera, and doing a little bit more due diligence there.
Presented from the Aishin Broadcast Studio at Babcox Media.
So I guess the goal would be you're going to look at, not only the last click of what brought them, but you would be able to say, okay, well, and I'm not picking on Facebook saying they don't get clicks, but let's just say, use Facebook as an example. Wow, 40% of the cars I sold engaged with me on Facebook within 30 days of buying the car, even though they came in off of a listing on cars.com or something like that. But you're able to see that Facebook was influencing 40% of your car deals. So even though you didn't have last click attribution, you could say, wow, there's a lot of value there.
Yeah. It is very cool to work for a company like Full Throttle where we have prioritized, not only privacy compliant manner in doing what we do, but also being able to, see that entire journey. And exactly to your point, Facebook may not be contributing to those clicks in this, scenario, but if you see that Facebook is also driving that traffic during that time, you can at least allude to that fact that it is doing its part in generating influence and visibility to your brand.
I want to ask you, because I've heard the term influence, and I've heard the term, everybody knows attribution. Can you talk to me a little bit about, like, what is the difference between influence and attribution?
Yeah, so it's funny you ask that. Influence influence is starting to become a buzzword. It's kind of funny because it's really, really hard to attribute influence to your billboard, as an example. Like you're working with your billboard vendor or whoever it is, and they're talking to you about how many impressions, how many drivers are on the highway to drive past your brand. And dealers do it because, one, it seemingly works. My brand's there. It's a necessary, component of my marketing mix, right? But you can't really attribute to it. And if you do put a QR code on a billboard, asking people to scan it
while they're driving, you might get sued for that,
right? That word influence is so funny, and I'm actually trying to break my own challenges of saying it, because TV, you can't, unless they actually scan your QR code on that streaming commercial, you can't really attribute. But did it show? Yes, right? It impressed upon that individual your brand. And so I don't know what word, maybe we'll come up with another word, but the difference between attribution and influence is attribution is actually a single action, right? Like I can see that lead clicked here, therefore they got credit for it. Influence, or some other word that we'll create or come up with maybe, or keep it, that in my opinion is brand, right? Branding. And I think the subtlety of when that branding is hitting those potential buyers is, I think, the critical piece. And one of the things that we have perfected is understanding when those shoppers are in market and putting your brand in front of them. And that has helped us at least identify another level of influence in critical moments of that buying journey.
I always like to think of, like, the example of Coca-Cola. Like, if we go out to lunch, people order a Coca-Cola, and it's not, you didn't even see Coca-Cola on the menu.
Is Pepsi okay?
Is Pepsi okay? Yeah, but people order, when you're ordering a beverage, you didn't see a Coca-Cola banner, you didn't even read the menu. The waitress comes right over and you say, "I'll have a Coke," because of all the influence that Coca-Cola's had on you, while you're watching sports, while you're doing this. They're everywhere, and that's influence, right?
It's funny. Coca-Cola was a client of mine when I was at Meta and Facebook, and you're absolutely right. Branding is a key component in the CPG world. It's not about transactions, because they know that as long as they can keep their brand in front of you more than Pepsi can, they have a better chance of getting you to pick up that 12-pack of Coke Zero.
Let's, we talked about how attribution changes. We talked about influence. Actually, we've talked about a lot of things today. I got another hard question for you. Over the next, and over the next 5 years, how are dealers, because we're always getting new ways to market. We're always getting, everybody's doing streaming now. Everybody's doing this and that. And I'm sure there's more to come. In the next 5 years, how are dealers going to handle attribution? What do you see coming?
I touched on it a little earlier before, and I think I'll just double down on that. And I think it is a critical, I think it's critical for dealers to add another layer to that measurement. And, the simplistic way of doing that, in my opinion, would be to do exactly what I had mentioned earlier, and that is to take your total spend, measure it against your total transactions, and come up with another aspect of that measurement, just so you can see how well your entire marketing efforts are going, adding that into your standard auditing of your spend with one of these listings partners, your spend with Facebook, your spend with Google, and making sure that you're not just turning the lights out on something that maybe isn't generating direct leads to you, but actually is helping you, right? And there are some tests that you can pull to pull something down and see what effect it has. That a lot of dealers do that today. But looking at the totality of your marketing budget and your marketing spend and the effect that it's having on your transactions, and looking at that through a wider lens to understand the effect that your marketing efforts are having. I have the honor of running our entire revenue division at Full Throttle, and so I also have the privilege to be in other industries now, and so I've gotten a glimpse in home services is probably one of our larger industries, and one of the ways that home service providers, which I think could lean right into how our dealers are measuring, is net profit per lead, net profit per sale. How much profit are they generating from their marketing on these individual transactions? There are some creative ways that you can start to measure so that you're not just making decisions on clicks alone.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned the billboard. I mean, when you bring up home services, if you turn on a radio station, like they're advertising like crazy, but you can't click on the radio. So, if they didn't understand that customer's journey, they would give no value to radio. But it must work for them because they're all doing it.
Yeah, I mean, and so are car dealers, right? Yeah. Like the traditional media is definitely changed. And there's obviously some detriments, and one of those detriments is I can't see a click, I can't feel a lead, so therefore it's not working. And we know that's not true, and that's why we still have traditional media. That's why it exists. It just needs to be a part of a greater effort, and the measurement of all of those things combined, I think, is a way that makes it easier to understand how effective your marketing is being.
Great. I wasn't planning to ask this question, but you brought up the log, the logbook, the paper where you had to write in, why did the customer come in?
Yeah.
And it was just kind of bouncing around in my mind. I always remember the general manager like, come on. So what you're telling me is we had 35 customers come in today and they were all walk-ins. Like, right? Like every salesman checks walk-in. Because you always forget to ask, right?
Right.
And you're like, oh, well, maybe we should just stop marketing because it's not working. Like we have so much more better data now.
Well, even better though, if you ask a consumer, they're likely not going to remember, they're only going to remember one of the things that they looked at most recently. Mm-hmm. They're not going to remember that they spent hours on your competitor site, and then that drove them to look at one of those listing sites to like do some comparison shopping. And they're only going to remember, oh yeah, well, I just looked at, my area and I ended up here, right? But one of those other stats, I wish I could remember. I want to say it was a speaker for AutoFi at NADA, but one of the things that they also presented was that the average dealership visit dropped to 1.1 versus 10 years ago it was 3 dealerships that a consumer would visit. And I don't know how scientific that stat is, but it feels very real. When somebody shows up, they're a buyer. So you've done your job for that. The scarier thing is all the people that haven't shown up at your store yet. Are you making sure that you're in front of them? Yeah. And that's one of the things that we're trying to help do.
Nice. Well, I really appreciate you coming in today, Will. Is there anything more you'd like to share with our audience?
No, I really appreciate the opportunity. This was a lot of fun, Brian.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to join us for this AutoSuccess Executive Spotlight. I'm your host, Brian Ankney. Today our guest has been Will McGinnis from FullThrottle.ai. We hope to see you again on a future episode. This one's Over the Curb and Burning Gas.